Torah reading is Parsha Toldot. Toldot means generations. In our Chumash, it's actually translated as the story. But literally, laholid means to give birth, as the names are presented at the very beginning. This is the story of Isaac, son of Abraham, as Abraham begot Isaac. And so a story begins to unfold of the recently married Isaac and how his wife Rebekah, not unlike Isaac's own mother Sarah, is struggling with issues of fertility. In this case, Isaac pleaded with the Lord on behalf of his wife, verse 21, Ki akarahi, for she was barren. And the Lord responded to his plea, and his wife Rebekah conceived. But the children struggled in her womb, and she said, Lama zeh, im kain, lama zeh anochi, if this is the way it is, what good am I? V'telech lidrosh et Adonai, and she went to inquire of the Lord. And Adonai answered her and said, 2 nations are in your womb, 2 separate people shall issue from your body. One people shall be mightier than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. And so much of Toldot is about the conflict between the twins, Esav, the ruddy one, who's also ready, and therefore he's the first to emerge. In that sense, it would appear, even though they're twins, in the Bible, there's the concept of primogeniture, which is to say that the firstborn has enhanced privileges, a double portion over the other children. And the second child is Jacob. And there are dramatic stories of Esau being loved, and it's in the past tense, in the close reading of the Bible. Ahav, Yitzchak ahav et Esav, and Isaac loved Esav, for he was the one who was a hunter and would bring him the game of the field. And Rivka, she loved Esav. Rivka loved Yaakov, the second of the twins. And so who has the right to be the next in line to carry on the faith of Abraham? That will be a wrestling throughout the Parsha. What I would like to do is first acknowledge what is also the Haftorah, and that's the reading from Malachi, one of the later prophets. There is no exact dating in the Tanakh, but it is one of the last of the books of the prophets, and he seems to be around the time of the return from the Babylonian exile, in which this particular Haftorah will announce and have reference to God's love of Jacob. I wanted to do a little bibliodrama this morning to bring to the foreground the life of Yitzchak, the life of Isaac. And so I went to research, both reading Encyclopedia Judaica, all the collection of midrashim, of rabbinic imaginings around who is Isaac. And then I read Louis Ginsberg, who is the great compiler, a 7-volume work on the rabbinic imaginings that fill in the stories. And in Louis Ginsberg, who was a professor at my school at the Jewish Theological Seminary, there is, in terms of chapter headings, Abraham, and then the next chapter heading is Jacob. There is no chapter on Isaac. And that's why I'm drawn to wanting to put myself in Isaac's shoes. He often goes underplayed, if not even ignored. And yet, remarkably, for the Jewish mystics, 16th century on, who, I should say, much earlier, the Zohar is the 14th century. That's the writing in which the Bible is seen as an allegory for qualities of God. And from the 16th century on, that becomes a more mainstream mystical understanding of Torah. And in the mystical understanding, there are 7 attributes in which God is manifest in the world. 10 attributes in total, but 7 in terms of how God interacts with the world, representing the 7 days of the week. Those attributes are identified with the 7 weeks between Passover and Shavuot. And the first of those attributes is identified with Abraham, and that's chesed, kindness. Last week we talked about Abraham and Sarah greeting visitors, hospitality, an eagerness to help. And so that's a dimension of Abraham, and by extension in the Bible, Sarah. Isaac is identified with self-restraint, a quality of humility that when combined with this overflow of love, a providing of a container which also means limitation, that enables Jacob, the third of those 7, which is called Tiferet, and that's compassion, a balanced perspective on how the heart with mind can engage the world. And so I have that in the back of my mind, that Isaac has a very clear identity in our Jewish mystical tradition, that of self-restraint. And so what I would like to do is ask Isaac a question, and that is, in what ways does he feel this identity of self-restraint defines him, accurately or not? And if it does define him, why? What is it about his own life journey that brought to the foreground this quality of gevura, which is understood by the rabbis as a heroism, gibor, of self-restraint, of containment, that is also understood in the mystical tradition as din, the quality of judgment. And so I'm going to go into the role play to be Isaac, having prepared with much of the reading of the commentaries about him, and in this spontaneous moment, discover together what emerges in interviewing Isaac after Jacob has left, right? The end of our parsha. Jacob has left, with Isaac having given to Jacob, the second of the twins, 2 blessings. The first seemingly with Jacob in a disguise, with the help of his mother, being told he will be the one who has the physical inheritance of bounty. But before he gets ready to leave, at the very end of the parsha, Isaac, knowing that this is Jacob, says, "You will be the heir to my father and to me in a relationship with God." Isaac, the question, how would you define yourself? Would you do so as gevura, as self-restraint? And if so, why? So I understand that for my descendants, be they my physical or spiritual, those who became identified with what I was given by my father as an inheritance, the chain of relationship with God, specific family relationship with God that I would later be identified as an image of self-restraint, a quality of humility, of even judgment. And so I hear your question, do I think that that defines me, and if so, why? And so I pause. It's hard to define oneself. And yet, I would like to think it's true. Again, one can't say I'm humble, because somehow that's not a statement of humility. Or even that I am one of great self-restraint, because I know in my own life where it was hard for me to control at times myself. And yet, I pause and would reflect with you about how I was formed, and where it will lead me is an awareness, even by your question, that yes, quality of self-restraint, humility, perhaps best defines me. You know, my father, Abraham, was 100 years old when I was born. When my mother, who was 90 when I was born, was told that she would have a child a year later by visitors who would, as my parents would learn, were angels who they had greeted so kindly to their tent. When my mother heard that she, at her advanced years of longing for a child, would indeed have a son, she laughed. And so that's the name I bear, Yitzchak, the one of laughter. And throughout my life, I've had to wrestle with why that's my name. Because in that case, she said a little bit more, frankly, as I understood it. She said, me get pregnant with this old man? My husband, he's an old man. And later, when God would tell Abraham that my name would be Yitzchak, he would say, God would change the story a little bit and say, she laughed to know that she was old. From that, I'm told that later generations would say that in marriage, you don't have to say everything for the sake of shalom bayit, for the sake of peace in the home. But I kind of laugh to think that my very name of laughter also embodies this tension of what do you say to somebody you love and what don't you say? You see, embedded in how my name was chosen, or at least the way God explained it, was with an element of self-restraint. God didn't tell the whole story. And I return to the nature of my name. Was my mother laughing with joy or skepticism? Was she laughing to say, halavai, it should only be? Or was she laughing to say, I can't believe it would so be? And therefore, in my name is this tension of, am I a symbol of rejoicing or of skepticism? And so my life unfolded with a very strong attachment to my mother. You see, I had a brother also, but of another mother, Yishmael. And you know what's remarkable? After my mother died, who was so dear to me, my mother's rival, Hagar, and her son, who was my half-brother, Yishmael, became my family. You see, the place where I would meet my wife, Be'er Roi, at the well of the seeing, is precisely the place where Hagar encountered God when my mother, Sarah, sent Hagar away with my brother. You see, my mother, Sarah, was so protective of me. She was so protective of me, as was my father. Here's something remarkable. After my mother died, my father remarried a woman named Keturah, and my father would have 6 sons with her. But he would send those sons away too, as if he wanted to protect me because they had quickly become of the land idolaters. And so my life was very sheltered in so many ways. And yet, I had my successes. My father was a shepherd, but not me. I became a cultivator of the soil. You see, sheep go to slaughter, and it never was like my passion. I was not one to slaughter. It's true, I'm a gentle soul. I became a farmer and successful. And more, I am the one who followed my father and not my brother, Yishmael. I am the one who, when his watering holes, his wells were closed off, I'm the one who fixed them. I am the one who tended to the needs of my mother when she was alive, of my father throughout his life. I was by nature a caregiver. My wife Rebecca, I saw her from a distance, knowing that my father hadn't given me the choice to pick my own wife. That's pretty remarkable. It wasn't true for my sons. They would pick their wives. It wasn't true for my brother. But I was protected. And my father, in his old age, after my mother died, sent off his servant to find the woman who would become my wife, Rebecca. And when she came from a distance, she found me in the place I often was, wandering in the field. Be'er Roi, in the field that was identified with Hagar. For there too, I felt the need to fix. It wasn't right, it did not sit right with me that my father had sent away Hagar and Yishmael. And so after my mother died, and I was protective of her, it became my purpose to create that Shalom Bayit. And I went to where Hagar lived, and Yishmael and I became very close. When our father Abraham died, we would bury him together as close brothers. That is my nature. I am the peacemaker. But for me, to create peace meant to be often at peace in the world. And so at dusk, I was wandering, as I do regularly. You may find also that at dusk there's a quality of peacefulness, this transition from day to night. And there I saw in the distance the camel, and I saw my father's servant, and I saw my bride. And when it was told to me that she was the chosen one, I had a choice, but I trusted. I trusted the judgment and the story that was told to me, that what defined the test of who she would be was that of kindness. She not only offered the servant water at the well, but all of his camels. That was the nature of my mother, kindness. The nature of my father, kindness. And I knew that with her we could carry on that spiritual quest. And I paused with a deep sigh because, you see, my wife and I did not always have the best communication. I let her largely have her way. And to some degree, she chose what that way would be, like in the story of the blessing of Jacob. But I knew who I was blessing. I knew it was Jacob and not Esau. It was in that way a bit of a play. And in that sense, I did so also for the sake of Shalom Bayit. You see, there's rules in our land, and the rules in our land and the buy-in from Rebekah and the buy-in from Jacob was one that Esav had to see as part of a larger plan, even a divine plan, and not as my dismissing of him outright as unworthy. And so, in my own way, it was my self-restraint that allowed me to create a quality again of Shalom Bayit, of peace in my extended family, to allow my son Esav, because he's so deeply dependent on my approval, not to feel outright rejected. And so, yes, my strength has been my weakness, and my strength, self-restraint. The self-restraint of being on that altar when my father had the knife over me. The self-restraint of never leaving the land. The self-restraint of being the only one whose wife was arranged. But I do so with the fulfillment that my life has been good and that I've had my own way of living my life as the man of the field who prays at dusk. The man of the field who, unlike my father, drew from the soil a harvest. My life has been good. It has been a harvest. And most importantly, it is the harvest that I anticipate of Jacob and a large family that will allow what I was given to pass through me to another generation of many, to what I anticipate will be a nation which will bear the light of love of the stranger, the kindness of my father, that will allow with my self-restraint, my son Jacob, to have the blessing of compassion from generation through me to generation, perpetuating a covenant with God. There is a need for self-restraint, for there to be justice. That is part of my name. My father was sometimes too good to my mother, like allowing Hagar to be banished. It was for me to create Shalom Bayit, and that is essential for continuity and for fulfillment. Shalom Bayit that comes from, like my name, knowing to have the restraint of when not to explain at all, not to lie, but to know the restraint of not needing to say everything when it can be hurtful. The restraint that allows for laughter, the laughter that questions what's possible because justice requires some element of skepticism, but more. I am the first to be given a name in our clan, and my name is that of laughter. For ultimately, it is the name of rejoicing. For my life has been good, a rejoicing of continuity, of being that essential shift from kindness to restraint that allows for compassion, the genuine being present for others. Ribono Shel Olam. I pause, shifting from being Isaac to being Eli, a name identified with the servant that was sent to find the bride for Jacob. Ribono Shel Olam, Master of the universe, may we each fulfill our potential, knowing that in our tradition, kindness is the starting point for what we need to evoke within ourselves. But it's a kindness that needs to be balanced with a quality of laughter, the laughter of both skepticism and rejoicing that together equal a quality of celebratory restraint that allows for the unfolding across generations of compassion. May we each cultivate the best within ourselves, drawing from our ancestors' great strengths. And together we say, Amen.